Yeah. Okay, we are recording. David, good evening. Welcome to the Nouveau podcast.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So we were just chatting about perceived political identities, and
You
were
want to start with
saying,
the heavy stuff?
yeah, you were talking about, your, I guess, political identity, and then how it's kind of become muddled because the extremes are so loud at this point.
Yeah, I guess like okay, so like I think you used the right word, identity, and I think a lot of people are trying to define their own identity based on how it aligns with, let's say, a certain crowd or a certain group of people, right? And I think what I used to identify with, I think I find more and more doesn't totally fit my own identity. I mean, I've grown up a lot, I've changed a lot, and I think some of those groups have changed a lot as well. Um, where I think the extremism has definitely gotten in the have been the loudest voices, right? And for obvious reasons. But then they tend to take over the narrative, which is something there. But I think it's still important to really have that sense of identity, including your political identity. Like, what are the things you stand for, in terms of the way countries are run or the way your communities run. I think that's very important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, the concept I think I've been kind of keying in on here is the silent majority, in the sense of the middle-ish who aren't really engaged in the Twitter feuds. And I think, like, I go out in the world and I talk to people all the time about their ideas, and I have never really had it become sour or anyone freak out. I think most people really, if the tone is right, can engage in a good faith conversation. Like, there was an incident last year that my girlfriend and I was referenced back to. We were at a wedding of a friend, and I had a few stiff drinks in me, we could say, and I was talking with the priest of the officiant of the wedding. I'm not sure which denomination they were, but the priest, I was asking him about his beliefs, and it came to the point where he said that he believes that when Christ comes, I suppose all of the dead are going to rise, literally be exhumed from the grave, and I even at that point, I clearly communicated that I didn't really think that was sound, but even at that point, it was a respectful dialogue. And if that's possible, then I think that there's no reason we can't kind of talk about our problems.
Yeah, I definitely grew up in a Christian tradition. I wouldn't be. I mean, first of all, the Philippines is very Catholic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen the value of it, the value of belief and all of that. But I think anything that narrows our perspective is dangerous. Whether that's some spiritual belief or some, even it could be a scientific belief. Like if you think about people who practice, some of the things that the Nazis practiced back in the day, it was like, for the sake of science, we're willing to do this, and so I think anything that kind of narrows our perspective and narrows the human experience to our experience or our own personal goals or our country's own goals, I think in a sense that has the potential to trample other people, right? So I think, yeah, but I get you, because I went to Kabul for, I think I was there for a week in 2004, right? It was like the first elections, all of that, and over and over, similar to you, if you're a reasonable person and you approach everyone and you approach decent people with a shared decency, there's no reason to end up wanting to kill each other, right? But if you approach people, obviously there are people in the world who, the sociopaths and evil people, but I would say by far the majority of people actually will find that share the same goals as us, to have a secure life, to have good relationships, to have some level of happiness. And if we can start with that, right? That sounds so like Zen-like. I mean, but I'm just thinking, like, that's been my experience. Yeah.
Totally. I often even question one. I don't have Twitter, so I don't know what goes on Twitter. But I feel like, I listen to a lot of kind of podcasts and social commentary, and there's always, even in like the sports podcast I follow, reference to like Twitter happenings. But I feel like we should really minimize that. How many productive, insightful conversations are happening online at all? Through text, like probably relatively few.
We're very good at. Okay, first, I have Twitter. I really like it. I guess I'm one of the. But I'm not. But I like it as a way to blast messages out. I don't really scroll and read through it that much, to be honest. And so my dad used to tell us, like, media is awesome, but basically you're allowing people to speak into your head. Now, you have a few choices on how to manage it, right? One is don't listen to everyone, right? Like, hear them out. Don't listen to. You don't have to believe everyone, right? It's like you don't watch a horror film and believe, like Freddy Krueger's in your cabinet or something like that, right? Like,
right.
So that's one, right? And I think that's a super basic thing. But then I think the more like the even healthier thing is, if you don't think that idea is beneficial at all, why put it there in the first place? Like, so for example, as you said, right, when you follow all these people indiscriminately, right, you don't realize it. You've allowed all of them to influence you, and usually when there's too many voices, at best you'll be confused. At worst, you'll be misguided. Either way, it's probably not good for most people to have too many voices speaking into them. You think you're informed, but really you're confused, right? And so not having Twitter is probably healthier, for most people, where most people aren't going to be that critical or that disciplined, So I don't know how many times I've been speaking to people and they'll reference TikTok as some sort of authority, right? Oh, I saw this person on TikTok, and it's an authority on work. Like, who the heck is that guy, right? Like, well, he has a lot of followers. I'm like, I don't care. I don't know who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hilarious, but it's like, it's common now, yeah.
It's common. So we kind of jumped into it, but by way of introduction, David, what would you like to share about yourself with the audience?
Oh, yeah. So other than like my critical personality, I quickly, so I'm in, I guess the way I kind of like organize my life is into these three boxes. The first one is really myself, and then my work, and then my family. So my family box is really my wife, my kid, my parents, and my brothers, and then of course my extended family, my closest friends. So personally, I'm obsessed with the idea of value, being able to create value, being able to capture value. So even the way I think about family is about what sort of value am I providing my wife, my kid, my parents, my brothers, their families by extension, and my friends. And so I'm always thinking about that. And then at work, it's the same. How do I create and capture value for our stakeholders, right? Our customers, our investors, our partners, our management teams, our employees. It's obviously been tough during the last the pandemic, and then this with Ukraine, the Philippine peso's getting battered. But I think even with all of these changes, it's always possible to find ways to create and capture value, and that's part of the fun of work. So work for me is all the activities I do to create and capture value. So it's divided into my corporate work, which is Bridge. So Bridge is a investment company in the Philippines. We have a payroll company here. We have a payroll loans company providing probably the lowest salary loan product in the Philippines. And then I'm with a group called DNB Aura, which is a venture capital fund in Singapore that invests in the region. And then recently during the pandemic, we put up an impact fund called Archangel to help the Filipino businesses that were affected by the pandemic. That's then started to grow. So that's been amazing. So that's work. And then the third one is really me as myself, right? Which I break down into my body, my soul, and spirit. Basically, my personal goals, right? So from a spiritual side, I think the goal is really to grow in serenity, where I'm not always in a rush. I'm not always like chasing the next thing, which I would say I spent most of my life doing. Now that I'm older, it's like you realize it's a rat race, and so for example, I really enjoy just being with my son, doing nothing, just running around the park, stuff like that, and you realize that, hey, wait a minute, that's a shortcut to happiness in a very simple way, right? And then of course, and then physical health, and then for the soul area, I'm very like I'm very interested in this idea of eudaimonia. Yeah, I don't know if you read Aristotle's. Oh, I should read. Uh, it's the. Oh, I can't remember the title. It's a very famous book. It's in my bag right now. I can't remember it. It will come back to me. But basically, the idea of a flourishing soul. You know, like the idea that, and a flourishing soul doesn't necessarily mean a wealthy, bank account or
Right.
or
Right.
or a title or a position, but a soul that is flourishing. So, for example, for an artist, right, who's producing, is able to capture the vision in their mind and represent that in, let's say, a sculpture, that's probably more their path to a flourishing soul, right? And living out. So it's a really interesting topic because it talks about living out your virtues with excellence, and then having these standards that you're pursuing. But it's usually standards that you yourself kind of like reflected and said, these are what I'm going to, versus someone else putting it on you and saying, you need to be this, in an Asian culture, it's very strong, right? You need to be this, versus like, you need to just like, these are the virtues that are important to me. And I'm going to see how that those can flourish in my life. Yeah. So I guess that's a quick way of how I kind of like look at my own life. I don't know if that's
Awesome.
clear enough. Yeah.
Wonderful. Very intentional. It's interesting that you distinguish between your personal self. It kind of sounds like carving out and protecting your autonomy as a person without sacrificing work and then your responsibilities and the joys of family. Along the theme of kind of men and bro nouveau mindset, men often have traditionally, their whole identities have been their career. But it sounds like you're kind of intentionally creating some safeguards there so that David, as an individual, the flourishing soul, maybe some of that comes from work, but it's not only work.
Yeah, like obviously it was a journey. When I was younger, all I wanted to do was build big businesses, make money.
Yeah.
And you think that will make you happy. I think you think that will give you the freedom you desire. You think, and you think it basically. You think money will give you everything you want, right? And I think money is an important part of life, and a healthy relationship with money is definitely important. I think you have one extreme that just like loves it, and they love it. They love it the way, like, if you were an architect, you love the cement more than you love the thing you can build with it, And I think so. It's important to know that life has a cost. Amazing things need resources, and so money, or as like a thing of value, right? A thing to exchange value, a unit of value, and all these things is important. But then you have people who demonize it and who don't manage it well. And what they end up with is they don't end up having the resources to build amazing things for themselves and for others, right? So I think what's important is that that your identity is not based on how many bags of cement you have in the bank or some warehouse, but by the structures you've built for others, And I think I think that's why I guess there's that separation. But I think what ties it all together is, at the root of it, is that whatever role you play, how do I seek to provide as much value to the stakeholders in that space, right? And so none of us are ever going to be perfect, right? Like I can be very, very grouchy and quick tempered and all of that. Definitely I have 100 flaws, right, or 1,000 flaws. But I think the anchoring thing is that when you at deep down you want to provide value in that role, then you end up sort of like taking a step back and saying, am I still doing that? Or am I losing myself to some other part of it?
Absolutely. And another thing you said that was interesting was creating and then also containing that value. And to me, contain means not letting it slip away, or not, putting in all the hard work to develop something and then having it dissipate. So does that come from experience, or why is that word in the mix?
So I think the word they use is capturing it, right? But
Capturing,
containing is
that's
actually
right.
a good word as well. Um, I think part of it is definitely experience. Like sometimes like a man will work so hard to provide for their family because they care about their family, and then come out from that whole experience without a relationship with their family. And so it's like you end up alienating yourself from the very people you so wanted to secure, right? You so, like, in other words, you so wanted to protect them, you so wanted them to be in your life, you so wanted to do a good job for them, but because of a limited view of what that means, you end up losing them in the process, right? And so the challenge with that is not only do you lose them because you didn't invest in the relationship, you actually feel extra bad that you lost them because you feel like you deserve the relationship because you think you did your part, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And so it's almost like um, the I wrote an article a long time ago when I was single. Well, I wasn't married, so I don't remember if I was single then. I'm sure I was dating someone. But it's like I was looking at a lot of my married guy friends, right, who were awesome before they were married, and then all of a sudden they're just like not awesome anymore. And I'm like, the only thing that changed in your life is you got married, right? And some of
Right.
these people, they were actually going out with for years, so it's not like you changed even who they were with. You just changed the setup, right? And then so I came up. I don't really know how well it was received, but the title was a leader, not a prince. A partner, not a princess. A purpose, not a lifestyle. And basically, what I was talking about was a lot of our lives now are simply trying to achieve a lifestyle sweet spot. And so we define the happiness or the value of our life based on how close we are to that lifestyle sweet spot. Or we define the quality of a relationship, let's say you and your girlfriend or you and your wife, right? Like based on how close you are to that sweet spot. And when you're far away from that sweet spot, you feel like something's not right, and so how happiness is basically how close our expectation is to reality. The farther away that is, the less happy we are, right? And so what I was finding is a lot of men had gotten stuck in this kind of like their role now in life was chief lifestyle provider, where they wake up every day and all they think about is how do I achieve this lifestyle for my family, right? Because they think that that's the score. When I say this, men, I don't necessarily. I need to qualify and say because women are also providing now. Like women are working just as much as men, right? So I think, but the challenge with both of them is that they're providing towards a lifestyle sweet spot, versus having an identity for the union that has a purpose beyond the lifestyle. Because the lifestyle is a moving target. It's a bus you'll never catch. And when you throw in social media and all of these other voices around it, your kid should go to this school, your kid should have this pram, you should have this baby bag, you should have this breast pump, you should have this school.
Yeah.
You can throw it. You should have this phone, you should have this car, you should have this
Right.
vacation every year. And before
Title.
you know it, yeah. And before you know it, that's you wake up every day trying to catch a bus you're never gonna catch. And then so you feel smaller because you're never catching it. And then you look at the highlights of other men, for example, and you see them killing it, or you think they're killing it, because you see them on vacation, you see their highlights. No one puts the part where they're like, like where they're down or getting drunk. I mean, well, maybe some people do these days, right? But all of that to say is that you're now comparing yourself unfairly to the highlights of someone. And so what happens is you now feel like a complete failure because not only are you never catching the bus because of this moving target, you're also not hitting it compared to other people. And both spouses tend to compare their, or girlfriends say, hey, look at them, or look at them, or look at them. Or, and it could be a very like innocently like showing the Instagram feed of someone else and saying like, oh, look at them, they're always on vacation. How come we never take a vacation? Like stuff like that, right? No one's trying to erode anything, but over time, that really erodes it because that lifestyle sweet spot, the target is a moving target versus, for example, when I was thinking about it, like there is so many stories in history of families in very bad situations staying very strong or men staying strong because at the end of the day they weren't there to hit a lifestyle sweet spot. There was a greater purpose that they kind of like were investing in that kind of motivated them, right? So what I found was a lot of these guys, they were awesome guys, and then all of a sudden now they're married. You think, okay, it's going to be even better. Instead, they're getting to alcohol, getting to heavy pornography use, taking drugs. All of a sudden, the things that you think um, should have showed up, I guess, before you got married, all of a sudden it starts showing up after, and it's because when you're getting shrunk, right? When you're getting shrunk, you need your soul now needs ways to cope, right? You can't you now need ways to, and the easiest way to cope is really through some of these substances, right, or some of these like quick fixes,
right. Idle pleasures.
and then it hurts it even more, right? So I don't know if I don't know what the answer is. I just kind of like observed it, and I think every time I see that happening to me, it's definitely that and raising a weak son are probably my two biggest fears in life. You know, just waking up every day towards some sort of like pointless existence, and raising the type of son that lives a pointless existence. I think would be my two greatest fears.
Well, thank you for sharing that. In the scenario of your son, how are you defining weak in that context?
Yeah, so it's a good, you know, like and like when I was younger, right? Weak is like if someone punched you and you cried, you were weak, you know,
Right,
like
right.
or if you cried in a movie, you were weak, you know, or if you were nice to people, you were weak. And I think we definitely have to change that.
If you're
So
nice to people.
yeah, like the
Yeah.
bullies, right? You
It
kind of like
was.
try to be,
Yeah.
yeah. It was weird, right?
It's
It's
weird.
like if you're not willing to bully, you're weak, right? Like, oh, you're too nice, you
Right.
know. Those would be like the things, right? So um, I think so. I think more than trying to, I guess, like more than trying to not raise a weak son, I think it's more like how do I raise a strong son? And this one I'm fleshing out, right? And I think part of being a strong son is being able to. And the reason I think about it this way is I'm actually writing an article now. Every year I write kind of like a finale for the year, and this year is about setting the captives free, right, including yourself, right, setting yourself free from the things that are holding you back and being the type of person that sets others free. And so when I say a strong person, it's someone that can break through themselves from things holding them back. Some of those things might be vice type things, you know. Some of those things might be conventions, you know, like community expects you to act a certain way, even though you know it's not right or not right for you. You know, like being strong enough to break through that. And then second is being the type of person who's strong enough to break other people through it, right? So that's how I would define that. So I'm kind of breaking it down to what are the physical limitations, and then the second one is like what are the metaphysical limitations. So some of those are like natural limitations, right? Like so if you think about what technology allows, physical, like we would have had to be in the same room to do this. Now we don't. So we've removed the physical time and space limitation, right? So being able to master technology is a big part of expanding and setting yourself free, right? But on the human nature side, being able to master your emotions, right? Where you're not closed. That's not mastering your emotions, that's bottling it, right? But at the same time, being able to express yourself, being able to set goals and stick with them, being able to do necessary hard things, you know. So those are things that, you know, like I'm fleshing out where essentially your character. How does your character help you set yourself and others free, right? So I think when I say strong, it's like strong enough to set yourself free, be independent, you know, be someone who's interdependent and someone who's able to create things and do those things. So yeah, so not too clear yet. I have an outline, but yeah, so more than kind of like trying to raise a non-weak person, it's really more someone who's strong enough to break through themselves and help others break through.
I love it. Yeah, I would agree with those tenets. I mean, I had a moment of clarity, I would say, in my adolescence or teenage years about nonconformity and the importance of nonconformity in my own identity as well. And I think that is this project, this podcast is my effort to kind of help people break free, right? Particularly men, to see that there are many ways of existing, there are many ways of communicating, presenting oneself, and relating to the world. And instead of a very prescriptive idea of what being a man is, how about, you know, someone can define their values and work every day to live those values out, and then build that foundation of I'm proud of who I am, and I don't really care what anyone else thinks because I've thought this through.
Yep.
You know, and it involves the physical, right? Like I think the physical self is really important as far as, you know, the kind of like bro science, like do hard shit, you know, like that stuff. I do value that in some ways, but I think that's another potential crutch, because there are those guys who only have the gym identity and they bottle their emotions, and that, that's not particularly strong to me either, and maybe they, had some traumatic experiences or something that put them on that path to being the big macho guy and they never dealt with it. That's not strength to me either, so it's kind of this, I think I like where you're at with, it's both conscious and kind of spiritual, it's also intellectual, and overall it's very intentional, right? It's deliberate. And to me, that's the biggest thing, dude. That is the biggest, for me, like, makes me fucking stoked to meet someone is when they're intentional about their life. And because we can sit here all day and philosophize, right, about the best way to do it and this and that, but like just caring enough to try is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the word intentionality is very important. And a lot of people think that just because you're intentional, you have to be perfect. I feel like I never hit the mark because I'm so intentional, right? You set high standards, but then you realize even if you never hit the mark, you're progressing. Versus someone who's like, I never miss the mark because there is no mark. I think so. They're never progressing, right?
Yeah.
Very common here. I think the U.S. tends to be more goal centric. I guess the ones at least I know. People here are very laid back, right? And so I think it's really, I think we can learn a lot from people who are more goal centric. But I think the other part is a lot of goal setting now is very shallow, and that's why we turn to life hacks instead of allowing character development, and so a lot of people look healthy, but they're not healthy. They have big muscles, they're not healthy, right? They're gonna die at 40, right? It's like, or a lot of people, a lot of women look sexy, but it's like that thing's probably gonna, like cause health problems down the road, and I've seen it, right? So I think the issues are like, that depth, like that intentionality, but you add to that like the patience, the character building required, But I think first being intentional is very difficult in a very busy world. It's like you kind of like wake up, open your phone, and and you've lost the plot, in the first 1 minute, right? So, and then you realize, oh, I'm late for work, and then you rush to work, and then you get to work, all you're thinking about is getting to work on time, and then you get there late, and all you're thinking about is not getting fired. Then you're behind the bus the whole day.
Yeah. The way I think about it with not getting lost in my days is to minimize being reactive, and to not be the proverbial pinball, getting pinballed around by my life, and instead controlling, what I can control. And that's why I love sales in that sense, because I know what I got to do. I know my things I need to achieve, and basically it's as long as I get there, happy days, and that's.
And then you can do other stuff with the rest of your time, right? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And in my my personal development is that I have a goal to be fully self-employed at 30. I'm 27. So to me that's my next progression, and like where I feel I'm on the right track as far as my personal development and who I am as a person and what I can provide, and I really love how your definition is help others break through the self-doubt. I think for me it's helping others shine their light more brightly. That's what makes me inspired, and gets me fired up. But yeah, and that's the next step of my evolution, I think, is kind of getting over that hump of, giving up the paycheck, giving up the security, and going for it, right? And kind of in that evolution. But one thing you mentioned is in this whole dynamic of like the father, son, the parent, the child, and also the Philippine context. I'm curious to hear about what does that look like, the modern Filipino family? Are there these influences of?
I hope it's better than mine.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm learning is that, and this is going to sound cheesy, right, is that I think number one is I think everyone. I try to think that everyone's trying their best. And when I say their best, to the best of their ability, some people really can't do any better because of a lack of perspective or a lack of opportunity. Some people are lazy, but they're lazy because they were not never taught to be lazy, or they were so frustrated by their past failures. So I kind of try to think about it where like without me falling into those excuses myself, right? Because that's possible. Also, when I think about others, I just think like, you know what, everyone's trying their best to get by, you know, and so, and everyone is going to have a mixed bag of good and bad and horrible and amazing moments, you know, and like whether you look at the founding fathers, right? Like I was reading through their lives, or you read Bible characters, or you read historical characters in any. It's like you ask yourself, how did these people end up defining the world so much? They would be canceled right away today. You know, if you think about all of these guys, right? You think about like David, Samson. You know, you think about, let's say, Hamilton. You know, so you think about all sorts of characters, right? Like Saladin. Or like you'd be like, these guys are gonna get canceled instantly, right? So I think being able to realize that everyone is like a mixed bag has really helped, and that we should be grateful for whatever we have. And so for example, right, like I find myself in a situation where we kind of have to live in three countries. You know, I'm in a country that maybe isn't the most. I think there's been a lot of growth. It's super exciting to build a business here, but we don't have the safety nets that, let's say, my son gets in the UK, or that you might get in the US, right? Like healthcare, the best healthcare is private. It's expensive, and so. But having said that, there are so many things I love about it, and I want to focus on those things. So when I think about, if I think about, let's say, not necessarily a modern family, but let's just say like a higher awareness type family. I think it's a family that is not necessarily comparing it's not after that lifestyle sweet spot, but it's very purposeful, and their purpose is not based on some sort of like checklist. If I check this, I have a good family. But kind of what you were touching on, where it's like you were so intentional about figuring out what you stand for, right? What you as a union or as a family, or the type of life you want your kids to experience. You're so intentional about it that even if it looks different from what other people are doing, you have the capability to stick with it and to make it happen and to flourish in it. So I think that would be like my definition. Because I think people have to realize that at the end of the day, we're all too human. And so even as ideal as we want things to be, it never really turns out that way. And that's fine. That's part. I like the individuation, the concept by Carl Jung, where he was saying that if you can integrate your trauma or your good and bad parts of your life, your shadow self, right, the best parts about it, you become an individuated person, a differentiated person who has unique value to present the world. Versus currently what we have is sort of like, oh, you have ADHD, get it out of your life, or oh, you have this issue, you're traumatized, right. Or get it out. Versus like the classical was like integrated into who you are, right? Use it to power. Let's say you see trauma victims. There's a lot of them. Those that say my trauma is going to be what powers me to help others with trauma. They become of great value to the world. Those that never get out of that trauma, the trauma becomes a complex. It always holds them back. It always, so I think even when it comes to families, it'll be those people who can be able to integrate their different experiences and present something unique to the world. In big and small ways. It could be a small way, right? It's still just as valuable.
Dude, the small ways matter. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can remember specific experiences as a young person with like see my families. So my parents were actually pretty censor's not the word, but moderated the kind of stuff I would watch as a young kid. It's like, for example,
sounds like mine.
Yeah, I had like 1 hour of TV a day. That was the rule. And I'd be like, Mom, I'm starting my hour. And she'd be like, all right. And I think that's a great rule.
Yeah, for sure, especially now.
Yeah. But there was a time when I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 movies, right? And looking back now as an adult at this moment, so I was at a friend's house, the Stelmaskis, great family, Mount Laurel, New Jersey, fucking great people. And I was there, and they were like a big Lord of the Rings family. They loved Lord of the Rings. And so it was one of the Lord of the Rings, and they were like, "Oh, guys, let's watch this." We're like, "Sick." And I told them, I was like, "Hey, like, I'm not allowed to watch PG-13 movies." And their response fortified who I am as a person, right? Because I was the type of kid to be honest in that moment, and they were like, "Wow, thank you for telling us. We respect that so much, that you're acting with integrity, yada yada yada." Reinforce that behavior very positively, and I know there are people out there who have kids who would either belittle that kid and be like, "You pussy," like what a dork,
Yeah.
So I think that's cool, and those little moments have a huge impact. Every day, the way I operate too is like, I should probably bring this more to the fore of my conscience, but I really do believe that we have the opportunity. The classic story of like, person walks the Golden Gate Bridge. If anyone says hi to them, they don't jump. And then no one says hi. That kind of thing of like, we can have that really positive impact on the immediate environment. And I think that's where I feel the most inspired. It sounds like you have a more systems thinking approach, or maybe a visionary kind of big picture approach. Maybe a good litmus test would be, when it comes to economics, are you more interested in kind of macroeconomic trends, or more in kind of the commerce of one city or even like neighborhood, for example?
I think I'm definitely a more big picture kind of person. So I would say I'm still interested in the village and community, but the individual side, like, I wouldn't be a good financial planner for someone. I'd be like, what is this? I'd be like figure. But I think I definitely see the importance of the. It's not the small, but what seemingly mundane. So I'll give you an example, right? Like NGOs. I remember I came across this stat, like there was almost like something like over 1,000 NGOs per person. Like for every 1,000 people in the Philippines, there's like an NGO or something like that.
Oh my God.
Right? So if you think about it, it's like shouldn't we be done with poverty and all these issues? If it was just based on, if everyone was doing their job right. And of course, no shade on NGOs. I think one of the things that's happened is we've outsourced the good works we should be doing to organizations. Like, for example, the Philippines, a lot of us have household help. And a lot of us don't pay our household help anywhere close to enough, right? I'm going to offend a lot of people by saying this, right? They'll be like, "Oh, at least they have jobs," all that. But but it's saying like, and a good one is that you would never take that job for that pay, for that treatment, right? And so like we try to pay our household help, I don't know, maybe like 5-6 times more than the market, But all of that to say, it's because it's a reflection not simply of what I think is their market value, but of my value to them as someone who's part of my life and who provides so much value to me and my family and my kid, right? All of that. So I mean, why would I be willing to spend more on my dog than my household? It's like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Another live human being. Like.
Yeah. So I don't think it's that. But you think about it, right? At the rate we're going, our staff and our help will be able to buy their own homes, or already have bought their own homes. Will be able to live and progress in their life. And then you'll have people who they'll really cheapen their staff, they'll really cheapen their household, and then donate to a charity. Right? It's like, but when you think about it,
great example.
Yeah, that charity ends up taking 8-12%, sometimes 30% or more of your donation to keep running, right? And then you think about it, that's a tax on your good works. When you could have put something together in place, with a little creativity and actually very little work. I mean, a lot of these people are brilliant. You can figure that out, and put them in a mechanism that allows them to actually achieve the goals of that charity. So I think that's why I think the seemingly small things they're not small, because when my dad used to use this example where in the Philippines you see a lot of street sweepers and people picking up stuff in the streets, and so the country has to pay for people to do that, because people simply won't throw the trash in the trash. You could use that money on other things, right? Like education and all the. So there's a lot of things that the big things you can now address. Let's say like affordable power and stuff like that. if the individuals actually did their part in the areas that they can, right? So I think that's a good example of why those seemingly small things are not small, because they're actually very important for individuals to be able to fulfill on their own.
Yeah, I love it, and good on you for doing that, because that's an example of trickle down economics working, right? You know, that's like a much belittled philosophy, but you know, in your case, you've taken it and gone above and beyond. Yeah, an observation I have here is that there seem to be many jobs that are repetitive work that aren't necessarily required. So, for example, like there are a lot of guards, right, at malls, you know, and they do the wand, but everyone beeps in the wand because everybody has metal in their bag. So it's and I understand the concept of like give people jobs, right? It's better for people to have jobs than not have jobs. But your example of like the trash is like, okay, maybe instead of everyone like throwing away their trash or not putting the trash in the trash bin, instead of that, maybe we could actually have everyone put it in one bin and then pay someone to sort it and then recycle that. You know, there are ways to change the workflows. But yeah, that, you know, as an American who spent, you know, 6 months here, I guess what I'm trying to decipher in my time here is what about these observations I'm having are uniquely Filipino, and what are the ones that are more reflective of developing world or developing countries as a whole, you know, and where are those distinctions? Because I think that's kind of interesting, because I know that there are, you know, a lot of like post-war economic institutions centered in the U.S., in the U.K., have kind of pushed out these philosophies, like economic philosophies about this is how it should be, you know. So I'm kind of just curious about that, and you know, I'm sure you, growing up here and also, you know, being a well-traveled guy, have some perspectives on that.
Yeah, you know, I think there's two parts. I think regardless of the economic system, I think every individual should take it upon themselves to improve themselves to the best of their ability and improve the situation of their loved ones, right? I think so. Regardless of the economic situation, like I think that's their personal responsibility. So I'm definitely against any kind of like belief system that says you don't have a choice, you can't do it. You know, you're even if there's sort of an unjust treatment towards you, by taking ownership over your life, it actually helps your mental health versus you're always going to be a victim to something that's happened to you, right? So I think all of that to say, it doesn't mean to say that it's not harder for you or that it's not harder for people. For example, when I went back into business, I thought I was going to do NGO work. I had to take over a business that was deep in debt, right? So I could have said, oh, it's unfair. I didn't get the capital that other people did. But I said, you know what? It's my responsibility. I'm going to figure it out. So my energy was better. But so I think that's the first part, right? But from a system standpoint, I do think that inequality is a ticking time bomb. And now that's not so easy to define, right? Because a lot of the inequality, you know, some wealthier people will say, well, the poorest life is much better now. They have cell phones, right? But there's a side of inequality where it's like, you're so far from me, right? Like I can't, my kid will never have the opportunities you have. And so that's definitely a major issue that people have to figure out, right? And I think that's where a purely capitalist worldview will never address that, because while there is a very kind of like natural feel to it, because it's very evolutionary, very Darwinian in a sense, it may not be. It may end up that we eat ourselves, you know, where because we don't, you know, we don't create the type of solutions, right, that allows other people to thrive, right? So I think that's one. I think from a Filipino standpoint, at least from what I can do, I think being able to improve the skill set, the value that a Filipino can bring to the market or to others is kind of like what I'm trying. So for example, I think a lot of employers don't realize that it's not simply their job from a capitalistic point of view. It's simply your job to give them a wage. If they don't want it, they can go work elsewhere, right? But I think great leaders also think about how do I make sure that the role you play is infused with as much dignity as possible? The wage is part of it, but your growth, and so feeling a responsibility for people that work for you, not simply, oh, I gave my wage, I'm not responsible. But for me, I carry kind of like a personal burden where if someone works for me for 10 years, where are they after the 10 years? Can they say, oh, he paid me, he didn't mistreat me, right? But I have nowhere else to go now, and I don't think that's very empowering. But I think part of the ability to say, because you work for me for 10 years, people want you, right? People are trying to pay you, like for example,
More.
people like to hire our people who used to work for us or people who used to work as our, let's say, nannies, because they know that somehow you were upskilled in the process and you were vetted, right? So I think that's a really good thing. So maybe most of these companies are using manpower agencies and all of that. So maybe those agencies have that. Now, obviously, there's some economics to it, right? But I guess first starting with the intentionality of being the type of boss or leader, that says, I need to infuse this role with as much dignity beyond just the wage. And people are very creative when they want to be. That's why when people say, oh, I have no ideas, it's like, it's just not that priority to you. I've seen people get really creative about how to make different types of money, creative about being corrupt, right? Creative about, all sorts of people are creative when they want to be, right? It's just not a priority for most people.
And not a priority, or they haven't been incentivized correctly to get creative.
Like from an incentive standpoint, right? Like value, incentive, like the way I kind of think of it, if all of matter is kind of like energy, like all at the root of all kind of human interactions is value, right? Some sort of incentive, some sort of like, I want this, and so there's like this, and I don't necessarily mean just economic value. And so I guess this is where my Christian upbringing comes in. I'm probably a bad role model, just to be honest. But I think from I was in Amsterdam and I was at the Rijksmuseum. I was looking at a Rembrandt painting and I was really moved by the painting. And I was saying and then I couldn't sleep that night because I came across something, right? My life was all about maximizing value and my view of value is purely economic, right? Or mostly economic. And all of a sudden, I'm faced with something I cannot deny has value, but I can't price. I couldn't put an economic price to the thing, right? Is it worth 100 million or is it worth 50 million? And technically someone will say, well, the price is what someone's willing to pay for it. But what was the price of my reaction to it, right? Where I'm so moved by it, right? What's the price of the thousands of people? So very hard to price. So I came up with these 5 kind of criteria for value. The first one was when I was looking at things of value, at least in my world at the time, was materials used. Things that had gold or diamonds, a watch that had all of these precious metals, they were more valuable. The second was craftsmanship. Something was handcrafted, master crafted. These things were more valuable. The third one was function. Like a MacBook Pro was more valuable than a MacBook. Had more RAM, had more power, processing power and stuff like that. The fourth one was rarity. The more limited edition, single edition, the more valuable. And the last one was maker. And so when you think about this one had the brand. Okay, the last one was lifespan, and then maker, then lifespan, right? So I started applying it to things that I wanted or things in my life. Let's say like a bottle of wine. Who made it? What was the vintage? This is how shallow I was. Or the car I had or the car I wanted, right? For example, a Ferrari I think uses a Poltrona Frau leather for the seats. Poltrona
Nice.
Frau so very nice craftsmanship. It really beats whatever. And then as I started applying it to the different things in my life, I realized that the most valuable thing in my universe were people. So when you think about craftsmanship, everything, materials used, everything else I was chasing was inert. Wood, metal, plastic, cloth, glass. It wasn't life. And I could see the value in a bottle of wine, but I couldn't see the value of my driver. And it was like, there's something that's wrong with I'm not saying it's wrong for others, but at least for me personally, right? Where I would rather save up and invest in something that will sit in my cellar than this life. Or 1,000 lives that's gonna help. Right? Yeah. And then the second was craftsmanship. Even if you took the biggest bum you knew, the brain alone, there's no computer that can do what our nervous system can do. So you think about the craftsmanship of the nervous system, digestive system, respiratory system, and my personal favorite, my reproductive system, right? When you kind of mix all of those things, right? It's way more craftsmanship, than the most expensive car. And I like well-designed things. I love well-designed things. But I said the human is so well-designed. And I'm only talking about the physical parts. Like, how are the thoughts? You know, how do those electrical signals in the brain create emotions or thoughts or imagination? I mean, it's amazing, right? That leads to the functional side. You know that people are more than their economic function, because a lot of the things that bring us the most happiness are not economically beneficial. Like my son's complete economic drain, you know, but he brings me so much joy, you know. And then you look at rarity.
Now he's a cost center, but in the future he'll bring more value. How you define it, potentially the family legacy.
Hopefully,
business,
yeah. And I think the joy itself is made up for the cost. You know, the joy of being his father is made up. Yeah, it's like we were talking on the phone over FaceTime, right? And it was just, it's like he goes like, I wish I could hug you, Dada. Like, that made my day. You know, I'm done. Like, I had a good day. You know, And then you look at rarity. Everyone's single edition. You know, and it's easy to kind of lose the individuality of a person in a purely economic view of the world, because you're just a means of production. You're not someone that could be the father of this person, or the father of the idea, or the idea generator of this life-saving thing, right? But when you expand that, then you can have more. And then, of course, maker. If you're religious, you believe God made man. If you're not religious, then you believe man made man, which I think is pretty awesome in itself. The fact that we're able to do that is pretty. And when I say make, not just kind of make a kid, but help cultivate and develop a quality of life, you know, that can be of good to the world, right? And then finally, lifespan. If you're religious, you believe man as a soul. If you're not religious, I believe that you live on to the lives of people you've touched, right? When you're able to take your metaphysical beliefs and create the types of institutions that allow you to scale that, then I guess, like, through your family and through the organizations you've built, that allows you, kind of like what you're doing with your podcast, right? You're able to spread yourself, right, in a way that before you only did that by making babies, right? Now you're able to spread ideas without having to do that. So that flipped my idea of value, where you want to make as much financial value to be able to impact the thing of real value, which is other people. And so I think that's the part where my kind of like my brain twist, my approach changed. Because it's like, I still love business, I still love building organizations and all that, but doing it for the money and doing it for the toys and the trappings that I thought were great, all of a sudden became, I mean, they're still nice, right? It's still nice to have them, but they're no longer the primary motive. They're not even the motivation. It's like, if I can afford it, if it's nice, I'll enjoy it.
It's a happy byproduct.
Yeah, it's not, I don't wake up to have a car, you know? That doesn't excite me the way it used to. Yeah.
Beautiful, dude. You're so reflective and thought out. I think it's so interesting and admirable about how you created the list of value. The way my brain works, I would go find a list of defining value, apply it, and kind of refine it. But you created one from scratch. And I think that's kind of speaks to the reason you're in the field you are, of uplifting leaders and organizations, you know, getting them avenues to capital and helping, you know, mature them into a organization to then create more value, right? You have the vision, like if you play rugby, I play rugby, or play soccer, you know, field vision, right? Kind of seeing how things are going to unfold, putting the ball where people are going to be rather than where they are right now. And I think that's great, man. I think that's an admirable quality for sure.
I think we start off building with what we have, and I think that's just part of the like I definitely owe everything I have to someone else, for sure. You know, that's easy to admit. But I also think that part of the fun of life is, like, I mean, a lot of people take it the wrong way, like being an Ubermensch, being someone, like, you don't necessarily need to use that idea in terms of lording it over other people. I think part of it is being able to actually come up with a new set of values that are good for people, and because a lot of the values that are actually taught, at least from my society, aren't good for people. They're constraining. They lead to bigotry. So for example, I believe that religion that helps people love others is very good, but religion that helps people hate others is very bad. I mean, it sounds so basic, but it's like it's true, right?
It's a good litmus test.
Yeah. So I think sometimes you need someone who's stronger than the conventions to say, hey, that's wrong. and I'm going to define a new set of values that's actually better, or at least to that person, right? Yeah. So I think we start out with what we're given, we refine it, like what you mentioned, but part of the fun is being able to create things for ourselves that may not be. And I use the word create loosely because again, we're basically combining things more than creating things from nothing, right? But yeah, I think when people realize that, not only do they have more fun, it's very interesting to see what people come up with. Like, wow, I can't believe you came up with that. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it, man. I think we're coming up here on time, but I did want to ask you. You're obviously a well-read individual. So, what are the top 3 most influential books that you've read in your life?
I remember the book I was saying earlier. It's the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. Definitely recommend that.
Nice.
I think more than a book, I think the first thing that I think from a mental model, I think first principles is super important.
Yep.
Especially today where it's confusing, where you're able to look for really strong basis, like fundamental basis for making decisions. It allows you to be original. It allows you to be aligned with reality without being constrained by society's conventions, right? Because you're able to go back to the fundamental thing. So I don't really know if there's what those best books are, like for that, but I think practicing that, like really thinking about life in that way, is really, really important. Yeah, I read so many books. I read a lot of biographies.
Nice.
Yeah, so I really love I loved Hamilton. That book was amazing. Peter the Great. I mean, because what you see is these people are very flawed, but it doesn't stop them necessarily from making a mark. Shoe Dog, I think, is a very good a book for people who want to start a business someday. It's a story of Nike.
Nice.
Yeah, that's I don't know if you ever read that. Yeah, I would highly recommend that. I think from like a personal development, I think 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person as always. I read it every year. So I think it's very straightforward, but the principles are like universal. From recent books, I thought Atomic Habits has benefited me a lot. I thought that was very beneficial as well.
Have you read any Dan Ariely?
No. What did he write?
He's in the Daniel Kahneman School of Behavioral Economics.
Yeah.
Yeah, he studied under Kahneman, and he has a great book. He has a number of books. The one I read that I really liked was called Predictably Irrational.
Oh, and I think I read it. That's the one with like bubble gum on the cover or something like that, like a coin gum case, I think.
I don't remember the cover, but it's just a series of experiments he ran, debunking the myth that consumers act in a rational way. Yeah, and it was just great, like a bit of a mind twister.
Yeah,
yeah.
No, it sounds good. Like Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman was good, right? Noise by Kahneman was really good. I thought that was interesting. How noise basically hurts decision making, and I think that's why a lot of Twitter is noise, right? A lot of media is noise, So that's interesting. Yeah,
that's great. Okay, so maybe even a better question then, because you do read a lot. A lot of people have said to me, "I like reading, but I don't do it enough," or So how would you help someone along the way who wants to read more?
I think it's really important. So I really like first principles thinking, and I also like outcome thinking. So more than being lost in the output, or let's say, the goal is not to read. The goal is to become wise and to develop understanding. And there's many ways to do that, right? And I think one way I would think about it is I would be like, let's say I want to be healthier. I'll start with that. Okay, I want to be healthier because I want to be healthier. I want to understand what does it mean to actually be healthy. So I remember this person. I won't mention who because it'll be so obvious who she is. But like, she did everything, right? Like everything from Taibo to Zumba to gym to yoga to Pilates. She did everything. And up to today, she's not the healthiest person, but she did everything. And so that would be an example of how many people approach reading. You're going through every exercise, but because you're not really judging your activities by how healthy, you have no foundational understanding of what is health, then you're going through the motions of what it means to be healthy, and you're not really becoming healthy. So a lot of people are going through the motions of reading without really becoming wise. And so the way I would look at it is that, what do I need to understand? So let's just say I'm in sales. What are the fundamental principles of sales? How can I understand that as best as possible? And then your reading list gets defined with that. Again, we're back to intentionality, right? You're very intentional towards what really makes me healthy, or what really makes me wise, or what really helps me develop better relationships, right? So like, it's a funny example. Those dating books, like The Game and all of that. Yeah, one reason why there's such bestsellers for men is because it literally helps them like go through steps. The intentionality is baked in, right? For worse, right? Or maybe for better, depends on the person, right? But I think all of that to say, it's like things that have intentionality baked in, then you'll approach it with that type of intentionality versus, oh, it's on a New York Times bestseller list, I should read it. Oh, everyone says I should read it, I should read it. It may not be the book for you. It may not be the book for you for the season. So I guess that would be the advice. Like, what are the most important things you want, outcomes you want out of your life? Look for the things that give you understanding in those areas. If it's health, what is real? So for me, I used to go through everything, right, and try just play a lot of sports, right. And I realized healthy for me at this stage in my life is high energy, being pain-free, like disease-free, pain-free, and functional excellence, where I can get through the day and not have a back pain. And so I don't need to run marathons anymore. Like I used to like that. Then I'd be like tired or something like that, right? So to me, it's like that's what healthy is for me. And so I need to understand the things that govern energy, pain and disease and recovery, things like that. And then of course, like be more flexible, because the older I get, I'm always on a computer, right? Like work on those versus try to bench press, 200% of my body weight and stuff like that when you're younger, right? And so I think the reading list should flow from that, right? So for example, there's so many great books. At any given time, there's probably 1 million manuscripts floating around, right? And so it's easy to get confused, where my reading lists are usually determined by what am I trying to understand for that season in my life.
I love it, dude. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Get clear on what matters and the goal, and kind of build backwards and find those resources. I like it. Yeah, because I think it's kind of the idea that if we go out into the world like seeking help or seeking resources or references, but just very generally and vaguely, with like a poor question is going to get a poor answer, right? So get clear on that question, and then you can refine the sources and qualify the sources to fit, my specific need. I like that. And that'll also solve the motivation problem, right? Because like what I was alluding to with the question, I think, is that a lot of people have a motivation problem with reading. But your method kind of bakes that in, because the person seeking the motivation defines the wisdom and the information they want. And if they define it well, then there won't be a problem with motivation to kind of dig into the resources. Yeah.
Let's say you like the girl, right? And you wanted to understand more about her. You're gonna find ways. It's not like
For sure.
you're gonna find ways. And so I think that's why, like in the Bible, when they talk about wisdom, they always refer to her as a woman, and that's something desirable. Like seek her. It's always like search for her, right? Like look for her. And I think that, and I think that's why knowing your own outcome is a better motivation than just looking at someone else's list. So for example, some people really want to travel the world, and want to build careers that allow them to do that. That's very possible. It's more possible today than ever, but it will not come from the conventional wisdom that they probably teach you in school, right? So things like that, right? Like they'll be able to chart that. So I think you find that. So I think another, let's say you don't know what you want, right? I think what I would start out is, what are your responsibilities? So when I first started, like back in the business world, I didn't start out with my dream job. I started with having to fix the family business, which I hated. I hated every day of it, right? But I realized it. But I love my family, And so it's like there are things, let's say when you have a kid, you don't like changing diapers, or when your kid throws up, you hate all of that, but you love your kid. So you're willing to do things and understand things that may be about things you don't love, because there's something on the higher order that you do care about intensely, right? So I think so. A lot of my reading this initially was like accounting and finance, right? I was clearing out debt, so I had to go back to all my accounting books, and I had to go back to all of like how do you read a financial statement. I wasn't doing it because I was interested in finance. I was like, I need to find every way, to fix this issue, right? Like it was finance, and I wasn't that good at it. So I think when you're not sure about what you want yet, you focus on what am I responsible for? Like who am I responsible for? And then how can I, and what do I need to understand to thrive in those responsibilities?
Beautiful, man. Well, David, thank you so much for your time and for an absolutely delightful conversation.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can we read your end of the year notes? Are these internal to your teams, or do you have a blog? Or
Yeah. The blog is Bonifacio.com. I'm updating it now. I also launched a small like poetry newsletter. So I like to write poetry. So I'm starting to populate that. Like I've been asked to publish books, and I just don't have the discipline, at least not yet, or the time to just write a full book. And I really like blogs, and like I subscribe to a bunch of writers and all of that, because it's like especially the ones that continuously give me value. So I'm a big fan of that in that format. Where it's more on demand. It's more I don't have to wait for a full blown book at the end of a cycle, right? So yeah, so I think that's the easiest way.
Awesome. I'll link
Or
it
Twitter.
as well.
I'm on Twitter. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome, David. Well, thank you so much for your time, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Lance.
Yeah.
All right. See you soon.
See you, man.